Hello, Joe. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
I'm very excited to have you here. I remember the last time we met for coffee in Amsterdam, actually in person. We could have recorded that conversation already. It was so
Yes,
rich.
that's true. That's true. Yeah, and it was the first time we're meeting, so it was like, can you really? We could talk about this? That's great.
It's true. It was kind of a blind date.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. And yes, I have so many questions about the book you've written, books, the work you're doing, have been doing. And we have lots of time to dive into that and the concept of respectful confrontation. Instead, I always start with the same question. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
I do actually. I'm very proud of considering myself a facilitator. In fact, I was just in May, I was a guest lecturer at the University of Pisa in their master's program on scalability in the School of Economics, doing respectful confrontation. And, walked in and there was a lecturer before me who had the PowerPoint and everyone is sitting in the typical thing behind their laptops. And I said, okay, we're moving the tables and we're doing this all different. And we sat down and their nervous systems were already activated. And I said, I don't really consider myself a lecturer. I consider myself someone who facilitates experiences.
Mm,
And they didn't get it at first, by the end they did, and their nervous systems could relax into it and see the benefits of it and really enjoy it, see the power of it. But I didn't answer your question. That was a preface to the question. I do consider myself a facilitator, and I guess it has to start from my childhood in a way. I can give the answer is that the first time I guess I officially started calling myself a facilitator was when I started teaching acting classes in Amsterdam in 1988. So that's part of the story. May I tell the story?
please.
Okay, great.
We
So
love stories about acting classes in Amsterdam.
it's one of those funny things. Like I'll give you three data points, and you're like, okay, Joe, how can you connect those?
Mm,
Um, so people also often ask, why do you focus on work like respectful confrontation or fierce civility, which is the new body of work? And I say, well, I kind of became an expert in confrontation and conflict just growing up in New York City. I mean, New York City every day was an examination of confrontation and conflict. I'm sure part of your culture too, Miriam, you know exactly what I'm talking
yeah.
about.
Yes.
So I've always had to examine that. How do you relate to people that you don't know? I call it, it's kind of like a forced intimacy. Uh,
Mm,
when you live in big cities, like New York City, you're forced to have to be intimate. Just being on the subway and or the metros, crowded metros, you're forced to have to negotiate space and power dynamics and energy and respect and all of those things with people you don't even know.
I have
Uh,
never thought of that. Yeah, thank you.
yeah, and I would say just from a global perspective, the larger the country is, the less skilled people are in knowing how to relate to strangers. The Netherlands, for example, is a perfect example of a country that's about this big, where people had to learn how to negotiate constantly space. And whereas in the United States, for instance, which is a contrast, is that I was speaking with someone who said I had to drive a mile to get to my mailbox. So you're not
True.
direct. Anyway, so growing up in New York City, also, I came from a pretty volatile experience childhood. My dad spent some time in jail when I was 12 years old, and it was very all about fight and arguments, and I did it, and I was expected to do it, and yet there was always a part of me that really questioned that. And the fundamental question of my work, Miriam, is why is it, even though we know better, even though we're a relatively intelligent species, we have all the
Mm,
information we need at our fingertips. We can see close-up pictures of Pluto now. We can see into the smallest of atoms. Why is it, even though we know better, we still have arguments and fights?
mhm.
And on a larger scale, crime and war. and hunger and oppression.
Yeah.
And that has taken me through my life to the point where I'm now facilitating work addressing that. One of the saving graces for me as a young man was being introduced to Tai Chi.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that really changed my world. I understood mind-body connection. I understood the energy and understood flow and understood dynamics and how to deal with aggression in a way that's different. Started studying a lot of Eastern philosophies, Taoist traditions, and Tibetan Buddhism. And all of this is part of the answer of when did I start calling myself a facilitator. Along with this, I started taking my first acting class at 12 years old. And in high school, I was doing semi-professional theater. So I was studying. So I was learning from the greatest acting teachers and facilitators in New York, and got a very diverse kind of acting training that was also body-based.
Mm.
As well as more the traditional ways of doing it. And I graduated university early and decided I was going to bum around Europe for a year. And I started in Amsterdam and ended up staying for 18 years. And one of the reasons I stayed was I met other English-speaking theater people in a very small theater in the Jordan in Amsterdam. And we started a theater company. And pretty soon after that, I started teaching acting. So that's the whole story. And the whole approach to my acting teaching style was based on my Tai Chi, the dynamics of interaction, of presence and connection, and how people interact. And I used to say that starting to study acting at 12, that acting is the science of human behavior. That actors are basically, all actors do is learn about the different aspects and the subtleties of human behavior. And it's their job to portray that objectively, right? They have to observe someone, and whether that person is an evil person or whatever, they have to get inside of them and cultivate that empathy to be able to portray them. There's a level of compassion. So all of these things, the Tai Chi, this acting of the science of human behavior, came together for me to start teaching acting. And I had my own acting school in the Netherlands, and as well as starting to do corporate trainings, particularly around dealing with aggression. But I started noticing, Miriam, that in the acting classes that as well as students becoming better actors, that their lives were changing.
In what sense?
Well, for instance, I did one exercise, which was a face-to-face exercise between two people, and one woman had a very big experience after that. And she came back to me the next week and she says, Joe, I just want to let you know that exercise opened something up. It made me realize for the first time that my husband is abusing me.
Wow.
And I've left him and I've taken the kids. That's one example. Yeah. So that to me is what facilitation is that started happening more. People started shifting their lives, shifting their habits and patterns, shifting their viewpoints. And I started getting more interested in that. So that's how I started learning techniques in facilitating transformational healing, learning about healing, about the energy systems, body work, and different traditions in that. And that all kind of, and I'll stop there. And if you want to ask me what I think facilitation is, you could ask me that. But that's when I started calling myself a facilitator.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to really walk me and us through this journey. And there's so much to unpack.
Yeah.
I think I could start anywhere. There were a few things for me that stood out that I would like to zoom into. One is the sense of proximity. So because you started with the explanation of growing up in New York City, where there's a high density, so people are physically close to each other. And then acting class is also, it also plays with proximity. And And then I heard you a couple of times referring to the body-mind connection. So there's something embodied, a somatic experience going on.
Yeah.
So how do you relate in your work to not only the emotional proximity between people, but also the physical one? And where does the body-mind connection come in to an extent that you can pinpoint it? Because you also mentioned that in the class you gave a few weeks ago, that you could see the change in the neural networks of your students. So I assume that you saw something happening in their body that translated what was happening in their mind.
Yes.
So,
I think that's what I think what I have cultivated is a sense of a deep level of sensing, of somatic experience, um, if people talk of understanding what an empath is, I guess, and its best qualities. Some people talk about, I might be stretching a little bit, clairvoyance or clairaudience, but you also have clairsentience, the ability to feel into someone and gather information. And I think we're all capable of it, but some of us can train ourselves in that, or some of it just comes more naturally. And when I'm training because I have a facilitator training and facilitation and transfer, I guess it's a training in facilitating transformation.
mm-hmm.
That what I say to my students and what I say to the people who assist me in workshops is when a group starts walking in for a workshop, I'm more interested in connecting with their nervous systems. And there's some part of me that doesn't even listen to what they're saying. It seems that's a very small fraction of the information they're giving in that moment. And that, in a sense, me as a facilitator, my job is to build relationship with the participants' nervous systems. Because there's more honesty there. There's more, because someone can say, just because we override a lot of we don't really listen, and we override a lot of through trauma or chronic stress, we'll say, sure, I'll do that. But the nervous system's like, I don't know about that. Let me feel into that. And that's what the training is training people to be able to listen more to the wisdom of the nervous system, the different parts of the brain, not just the neocortex, but the wisdom of the reptilian brain and the limbic brain.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I will remember my question.
No, please ask it. I'll go on.
I was wondering that because there are two aspects there, you first have to connect to your own nervous system to really understand, and then to connect to someone else's nervous system. I assume it's not telepathy, so it's a high sensitivity to body language, to facial expressions. What is going on there? Or is it the deep empathy that you indeed have a body reaction to someone else's body reaction that you cannot even put your finger on?
I think it's inductive and deductive. I think in a sense that, you can train yourself. You can, yes. A large portion of when I train facilitators is, I'm not a typical, first of all, I'm not a typical facilitator. Like I said, I'm a typical lecturer. I have my journey. I know what the outline of the journey is, and that's as far as it goes. People who are on my teams, they're like, Joe, I can't follow it. I said, it's really simple. It's really very simple, but it does take this, because I'm in relationship with the group, in essence. We're in a dance, we're in a dialogue, and that it's my job to facilitate them on their journey. It's actually the same thing that I did if I would create theater pieces. I would think it's the same thing. You bring people into an experience, and you're taking them through a journey, and the journey you want to take them on. And with every group, that journey is going to be, just thinking of someone who's a guide, a tour guide. Some groups are more young and fit, and you can move more quickly through ruins and things like that. Others aren't. You have to adapt, but you're going to do the journey. And the fun of it is to meet people where they are. So most of my facilitation, my trainings in training facilitators is not so much learning modules, but it's training the participant to hold higher levels of resistance
Mm.
and to be able to hold the energy of a group dynamic that can be very intense, that leads to transformation. And that is the work, because and that takes a lot of internal work, working through your own trauma, working through your own biases, your own limitations, learning what it means to keep the nervous system regulated, knowing what to do when you are triggered by someone in a group and how to manage that. And I truly believe that the nervous system, because that's what the reptilian brain's job is to always seek out safety.
Mm-hmm.
So in a sense, I'm more successful as a facilitator when I'm in relationship with someone's reptilian brain,
Mm-hmm.
because in essence, what my job is to just create a space of safety and trust. And I can only create a space of safety and trust if I am regulated, if I have equanimity, if I have the capacity to show that I'm open to whatever unfolds.
If you feel safe and trusting, basically.
Yeah. And that's the key to my leadership, to when I train leaders, is that what.
And you mentioned trauma, and then I wondered, to what extent can you, there's so much that gets into our way to relating to ourselves, to be equanimous, to hold that space. And if someone has suffered trauma in the past, that's a different work to do in order to come to that space, to hold space for someone else, and to be triggered. So what are the prerequisites for someone to achieve that? And are there any shortcuts? So how do you deal with all this baggage that one individual of a group comes in?
You got another 8 hours to talk about this, or?
Sure.
Sure. Well, I think it's creating. I would say that it is, in a loving way, creating structure, and in a fierce way, creating spaciousness. And compassion. The basis of the work of respectful confrontation and fierce civility is understanding the power of fierce compassion, meaning that you can cultivate the love. You can create a space of love, of openness, of possibility, where anything is possible, at the same time creating the fierceness of saying, and at the same time, I'm going to do everything radically, fiercely, to make sure no one gets harmed in this space. And so in a sense, you're playing the nurturer and the protector in the space. And again, a lot of this is subliminal, a lot of this is unconscious, right? The nervous system feels it, because for someone, and I used to say, I've said this, I believe this about all things, but I would say that about in my acting classes. I believe you can't find the freedom in your creativity without having some kind of structure.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Do you see it the same way?
And boundaries,
Yeah.
structure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the more structure you create, and then say, now within this structure, you're free to explore however you like.
Mm.
That's right for you. And I am modeling vulnerability. That's the power of the work. That the essence of the work is this declaration. And I've done this even with combat veterans, even with incarcerated men, even in the Middle East and conflict zones, even with NASA scientists and engineers, even with CEOs, that the fundamental core of the work of respectful confrontation is, it's in your vulnerability that your true power is revealed.
Mm.
And people get activated and have resistance, and that's beautiful. That's okay. So that means they're engaged, right? And that the whole training is, I say, is a laboratory of understanding what that means. And I demonstrate power and vulnerability. My teams with me demonstrate that. And the request is that people begin to understand again the difference between unsafe and uncomfortable.
Oh yeah.
And that what I say clearly is that if you have trauma in your system, if you suffer from chronic stress, or if you're a human being in 2023, there's that. We're in such a level of high anxiety that our nervous systems can't tell the difference anymore between unsafe and uncomfortable, which means that as soon as we begin to feel uncomfortable, and remember, intimacy is an uncomfortable experience, right? Growth is an uncomfortable experience. Learning, all this, Miriam. I'm not saying anything you don't already know. But the body will register uncomfortable, but because we don't slow down, the nervous system and the whole response will go into fight, flight, freeze of this has got to be unsafe.
Thank you so much for this distinction. And I love making the joke that our brain very often confuses an email from a colleague with a tiger who's jumping out of the screen to eat us. And that's basically exactly what you're describing.
Yeah.
But I didn't have the
Right.
appropriate words to explain what's happening around that. So basically, in order to hold space to lead, you have to calm down your nervous system so that you can clearly distinguish between unsafe and uncomfortable. Because only then, if I understand you correctly, then you can grow, because then you say, okay, I'm uncomfortable. This means there's potential to grow. Whereas if I'm unsafe, I need to have my guards up because I would need to protect myself. So they're two totally different strategies.
Yes. And that's the practice. It's not overriding the fight, flight, freeze response. It's adjusting. It's dancing with, because it's okay. It's really good. I always say to them, when I have that, I always say, thank you, reptilian brain. Thank you for taking care of me. You love me. Thank you so much. Now, and or the trauma parts of us, the young parts of us, right? The parts that were traumatized,
So small t trauma, I assume.
Yes. We still, in our adult lives, we still hold on to patterns that aren't serving us, but and that are coming from that quick response of this is uncomfortable. Oh, it must be unsafe, and we go into that maladaptive coping mechanism. And so the training that I do, it's based on like martial arts and sports training, where it's you're learning. There's a lot of physical exercises of how to shift those patterns, and again, not override and subvert, but learn to just redirect. Because in a sense, when you get activated, because the activating the sympathetic nervous system, right? The stress response is delicious. It's what athletes need. It's what performers need. It's what facilitators need. So it's not bad. It's simply when you flood the system with the hormones that are activated with the sympathetic nervous system, or you stay in that high state of stress and hormone activation, and you burn the body out. You burn the system out. But we need to activate that and be in, again, the presence, and that cultivates that level of presence and connection. And in my work, the definition of resilience and what to be effective in respectful confrontation, to be effective in fierce civility, to be an effective facilitator means to cultivate a sense of mastery of presence, awareness, balance, and flow. And that's resilience. Because if you can move through the world with the appropriate amount of presence and awareness, which means you're connected to yourself, you're connected to others. If you can maintain balance, balance is not static, right? As Libras, we know balance is not static, it's always moving. And that's the flow part. Balance without flow is stagnation.
And it's
Uh,
very
Flow
unstable.
without balance.
Unstable. Yeah, it's
Well,
dangerous.
it's impermanent. It's
Mhm,
always
mm.
it's unstable if it's not in the
Yeah,
coupled
in the
with
flow.
flow.
Mhm.
Yeah. Same thing with flow. If it's just flow, then you're just wandering and just meandering.
It becomes woo-woo.
Yeah. Yes. So that's the practice, is to in every moment to cultivate presence, awareness, which includes connection, balance, and flow.
Can you give us an example of an exercise where you use movement and body? Because I have the impression that there's so many scientific voices that are getting louder that tell us that embodiment in this work is crucial. We cannot ignore everything that is below our brain. And still,
Right.
I think few facilitators dare to invite groups to actually do embodied exercises.
Right. Well, I've cultivated all of my embodied exercises to work in any environment, whether it's I have a distinction between an open enrollment workshop where people come for their own development, where people do some deep trauma healing work, if they choose to, or stepping into their power. And I work in organizations where, of course, the request is different. Something as simple as, as a starter, I remember, I just basically do an exercise at the beginning where I just say, throw away your hands, throw away your feet, throw away your head, throw away your whole body. And that gives me a lot of information of how quickly I can move through with a group or not. Because I remember one time, just that one exercise, it happened to be a group with a lot of trauma history. That took about the exercise itself took about 5 minutes, but the unpacking of it took an hour. Because that already activated a lot of fear, a lot of trauma, a lot of recognition, self-recognition. But another low-level exercise to do is have people stand in a circle, have one person in the middle, and then the game is that person in the middle communicates with the person. I'm coming towards you, not communicates, but just starts walking towards them. As soon as that person knows that that person's going to take their space, they step out and take another person's space. And that just keeps going. And you see that people start very much in their heads, their body language is very tight, and they're looking around. And the more you allow them to do that, they drop in and they start trusting their instincts, and they're not worried so much about that. And the power of it is that we do different rounds of it, is that they get to see, wow, that was intense, right? I always say, none of you were breathing. Maybe you should take a breath. And they get to see that even with a low level thing, where the stakes are really not that high, it's not life or death, it's not a hungry tiger, that still their body goes into such a high stress state. So they get to experience that, wow, just with a silly game, I'm already freaking out about what people are going to think of me. They get to see their patterns. The worrying about, well, I went into that person's space more than once. What are they going to think of me? That person, no one's ever gone to them, so I should go to them. All this head stuff that wears us down, that slows us down, and is not creative.
Yeah.
So, and then they get an embodied experience of what it means to be free, to come from their core and their heart, and to just explore without knowing what the outcome is going to be until they get the outcome. Plus, they understand the dynamics of the group dynamics, the group rhythm, how to work together.
Yeah.
That's just two. There's plenty more that I can, and maybe I can talk. Yeah, it's plenty more.
Yeah. And thank you. What came up is we don't know what the level and the trauma of a group is. And I can imagine that, especially in the corporate context, so in a space where people did not enroll for their own personal growth. But in this context, we have to be quite careful then with such exercises, because as soon as it becomes embodied, as you say, something can be released. So what is your understanding of trauma-informed facilitation? How much or how little do we need to know about that? Or how can we become at least aware or sensitive to that?
Well, I think you need to know a lot about it if you're going to call yourself a trauma-informed facilitator. I think you need to take it very seriously. I think it's far too easy for people to do a 2-hour workshop and say that they're qualified in something. Personally, I've gone through years of working through my own trauma. I mean, that's an important part of it. And so I always come in with this idea of I'm no different from you, if that's what comes up. And I think it really has to do with understanding presence and connection on a far deeper level and listening. So to only go as far as you feel within yourself that the group can go, and that's fine, you know. And you know the way if I were to draw it on the chart, the how I design my workshops is that the level of nervous system activation that I want to get from a group will go higher. But what's important to know is that allostatic balance, that you know, whether it's within yourself or with a group, if you are activating your stress hormones, if you are activating the sympathetic nervous system to really cultivate resilience and not get it stuck in patterns of chronic stress and trauma, you must also purposefully activate the parasympathetic nervous system and come back to regulation. You must. And just as much, you know, because you know usually we activate the stress hormone, we go above our capacity of what is healthy for us, and we're up in here, and we may rest a little bit, but then we stay here, and then we activate more, and we think this is the new normal, but we don't realize that we're in hyperactivity. So it's really key that if you're going to activate a group, that you must find a process that brings them back to regulation, brings them back to themselves, bring them back to connection with themselves, their surroundings, and others, into their hearts. And then you can activate more, but then you must bring them back and come. And so that's how I would say I do trauma-informed facilitation, is that I feel into how far I can stretch people, and I won't go any further than that. And then I bring them back to regulation, and then I prepare them that we're moving. You know, I don't say, "Oh, this is going to be terrible," but I let them know, you know, that we're going to activate your nervous system more, and that's the process.
Yeah.
So it's like breathing, right? It's like it's natural.
Yes. And I wonder whether many of us have unlearned that, because I think, and I can only speak about myself, I think I had moments, and I'm becoming better, I'm still not there, where actually this hyperactivated mode feels much more comfortable, because I don't have to come down, I don't have to reflect, I don't have to think about everything that has been activated and everything that could touch trauma.
Yeah.
Because this feels very dangerous.
Yeah.
So, and I'm seeing the card in the back of your screen which says "Dare to relax."
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder whether this relates to it, where actually bringing the group down, I think, needs even more careful facilitation, because you need to create the space where it feels safe to relax and to calm down the nervous system, to integrate.
Yes. Yes, that's key. It's reminding people that this is normal. This is normal. That you know we become so acclimated to high levels of stress, and the world system does it to us too, right? The world system is doing a great job. The media, social media, world governments, and all of it, that they're doing a great job of keeping us dysregulated. That you know, you got hats off. You know, they're doing a great job. And disconnected and isolated in a sense, which is causing us to feel powerless, helpless, and depressed. And I mean, the level of anxiety and depression has gone up. And so for many of us, if we don't take the time to think of it, we don't know anymore what it's like to be calm or to relax. And that sign up there, data relax, that's for me. That's for me. It's there in a prominent place where I see it, where I have to remind myself. And that's key, you know, with the respectful confrontation work. So a couple of things to share around that. I did a 3-hour training for some of the top executives of one of the top international consulting companies. There were about 50 of them there from around the world, I think, certainly around the country of the US, I think around the world. High level facilitators themselves as consultants. And we did a 3-hour session on this work. And at the end, I always ask, so how was the session for you? And one woman said, it's great to feel human again. And I'll never forget that. That really stuck with me. And I realized that that's the work, you know, in this, to get a group to a point where I do say that, especially with respectful confrontation, where they get to the purpose of that is to get an embodied experience of who you are in your authentic power. Not an idea of power, but truly what it feels in your body, your authentic power. A lot of the work of respectful confrontation is reframing power. I have a whole system, the 4 pillars of resilient power based on that, which is all somatic work. But to be able to say to a group at that point in the training, please remember how you are feeling right now. At this point, it's very intimate. People are really connected. People can feel their hearts are flowing. There's a sense of stillness within each individual in the group. And I say, this is normal. This is how we're supposed to be. And just remember in 2 or 3 days, when you go back to your world, please just think that.
Again, there's so much to unpack. One is the awareness. So the responsibility of you, if you're the trainer, to release the group with this level of awareness and vulnerability, emotional vulnerability back into the work, into the world.
Yes.
How to prepare them.
Is that a question?
Yeah, I guess it is a question. And maybe it is related to this new level of power that they feel, because power comes with responsibility.
Yes.
Towards ourselves and the others.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if I have a direct answer of, you know, just to make sure that there's enough time built in that people get to process. I always say, well, I want to put all the pieces back together of a person, make sure that, you know, and I can feel that in the closing circle. I give a lot of time for the closing circle for people to share. And I can feel if they've come back into alignment or not. I think that's key.
And the more you speak about the respectful confrontation, the more I wonder, it's funny, initially for me it was clear that it's the confrontation towards others. And now I wonder, isn't it more the confrontation towards ourselves?
Yes.
So let me ask the question, confrontation with whom?
Yeah, well, both. It really is both. But through the process of respectful confrontation, one of the processes coaching people to kind of outline a confrontation they'd like to have with someone, a real person, you know, whether they're not in the room, but someone else. And for some people that can go back to childhood abuse, that can go back to a boss who's a bully. And oftentimes when people actually go through the process of thinking they want to confront someone else, they realize actually the confrontation is with myself. I need to just deal with some stuff within myself. And yeah, and that's, I would say, a more advanced level of the work is how do you start confronting aspects of yourself? And, you know, because the work is of respectful confrontation. It's a method and a practice to develop the courage and the skills to stand in your power, speak your truth, get your needs met in a way where you don't get harmed and other people don't get harmed. And that's the key. The key is, and I spend a lot of time helping reframing the difference between conflict and confrontation. And that confrontation is actually an opportunity for deepening and cultivating relationship.
And conflict isn't?
No, not in the way I look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Not in the way I look at it. I know that then in the conflict resolution world, the international conflict resolution world, I've worked with a lot of people who talk about good conflict and bad conflict, and that the good conflict is kind of what I would call confrontation. So whatever you label it, the idea is, the purpose of the training is to help people overcome their concerns about difficult conversations and fears that it's going to lead to conflict or be aggressive, not allow the reactivity of another person to stop you from speaking your truth, in essence, and to understand that it's an act of love and compassion to have the difficult conversations. And that in essence, with my certified trainers and the people in my world, if someone were to say to me, Joe, I'd like to confront you on something, of course my initial response is going to be fight, flight, freeze. But then when I do my work, I take a breath and get regulated. The only thing that comes up is gratitude, because in a sense what they're saying is, Joe, you matter. Right? I could easily not have this conversation and just let the resentment or whatever happened between us fester, which is going to break down the relationship. It's going to cause harm to us both eventually, or just not engage with you anymore, right?
Yeah.
But because I'm choosing to have this difficult conversation, I'm actually implicitly saying, you care and you matter to me.
And there's hope.
Yeah.
Because one wouldn't engage in a confrontation, in a respectful confrontation, if we wouldn't believe that there is a possibility of a positive outcome, of a better situation afterwards. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense. Otherwise, we engage in a conflict.
Yeah, right. And not doing it is conflict, according to my system, right? I always say that, what causes conflict? Saying yes when you should say no. Saying no when you should say yes, not saying anything when an injustice is happening, or
especially this ignoring, and I think we all know it, how it impacts us, the unresolved conflicts that continue to be processed in the back of our mind and then once in a while pop up. Or cause us to sleep, to insomnia. Worst case. And I want to come back to the anecdote, or to the story you shared at the very beginning. And you said something along the lines of, we can look at Pluto and still we can not deal with the situation that there is conflict in the street, or that we engage in conflict, or that we I don't remember your exact words.
Arguments.
There are arguments, yes.
Yeah.
So I think now I have sufficient background on your story to have the impression that I can now put it all together. That do you then believe that these conflicts and arguments in everyday life that are higher, the denser our populations are caused by all of these issues that, first of all, we haven't dealt with our own trauma, then we confuse insecurity with discomfort, and we haven't learned to be in a respectful confrontation with each other?
Yes, we weren't taught those skills. We weren't, I always say, again, another thing with respectful confrontation, that the language of power is the language of feelings and needs. And I'll say that to scientists, I'll say to scientists, to CEOs, to whomever. The language of power is the language of feelings and needs. because we get so caught up in opinions and ideas and viewpoints and judgments, and we can spend decades arguing opinions and not get anywhere. Or but to be able to say, last week at the meeting we were at, what I noticed was that every time I brought in something, that you cut me off and talked over, and you cut me off. The feeling it brought up in me was that I felt shut down, and I was confused. And what I need is some space. I need the space to be able to finish my thoughts and share my ideas, right? That's the wording of a respectful confrontation. It doesn't get into good or bad. It doesn't get into interpretations and judgments and accusations. It just simply says it. This is what I noticed. This is what I'm feeling. And this is what I need. And the key to the work, and this is a lot of feedback models, is that if I can really express what I need and not what I need you to do, I need you to shut up, is basically what I want to say, right? My normal Joe self's like, I just want you to shut up. Just do it. But that's not going to work. So need you to do something is not an effective strategy. But what I need is space. I need respect. I need support. It allows you to hear that without you feeling threatened or activated, to be able to say, okay, I understand you need, because I understand what it needs to feel, what it feels like to need space, so I can relate. But then, if I may, just to finish, what's most important at this point is for me to say, Miriam, what do you need? And when I can put my needs on the table and you can put your needs on the table, and we do a creative process, that's the creative emergence, right? New solutions are going to emerge that wouldn't have happened if we didn't have this conversation, if we didn't have that tension. And that's where I have seen it with companies I've worked with, when I've where they have come back and said, Joe, it works. Just, in the past where there were no solutions, new solutions can emerge if you can approach it from this way.
Thank you for this example. And I totally understand where the vulnerability piece comes in, that you mentioned earlier, that vulnerability is the building block of power. You use different words, but that's what I remember.
Yeah.
Where in order to express what I need and how I feel, that's the highest level of vulnerability there is.
Yeah. And it's powerful because it cuts right through all of the intellectual blah blah we get into.
And still, I think it sounds so easy. And I must say that in the recent healing and personal growth work that I'm doing is to find out, what is it that I need?
Yeah.
Because I think it's difficult. For many, it's very difficult to really look inside to find what is it that I need for myself, not what I need from you. That is most of the time just either distracting or numbing.
Yeah.
My actual own needs.
Yes, and you can use the same process with yourself, right? Let's say that, to identify a part of yourself. Let's say, for instance, there's a part of you that says you're not good enough, or right. So to be able to confront that part of you, to say, listen, I'm noticing that every time I do something where I succeed, that you come in and you say, oh, it wasn't so great, or whatever. And this is to yourself, or you shouldn't do that because. So the effect it has on me, is it shuts me down, right? It's the same process. And then to be able to say to that part of you, what I need is grace. What I need is space. What I need is
appreciation, acknowledgement.
Appreciation. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And then to ask that part of you, what is it that you need? What do you need? Well, I need to know that I matter. Oftentimes those parts of you are just like, I just want to matter. So, and unfortunately, the way that part of you is taking care of you is sabotaging you. Or to be seen, right? I see you, and You know, so that's a beautiful. I've done that with coaching clients where we've actually role played that, where to help them confront parts of themselves and to come to some reconciliation and healing with those parts of themselves.
Yeah, I love that. And so my optimistic self is just jumping up and down now, seeing all the possibilities and opportunities for your work, how this can spread through organizations and nations to bring peace. Because I think once you have experienced such a respectful confrontation and the fruits that come out of it, I think you want more of it.
Yeah.
And then the devil on the other shoulder is like, yeah, but clearly we haven't arrived there yet, so something is missing. And I wonder whether it's how to keep training that, because I believe that it's like a muscle that we have to train, that yes, it feels good in the moment and we learn it and we feel it, sense it, embody it. And then when the next stressful situation comes, it's so easy to slip back into our old behavior where we just protect ourselves and I don't have time now to be vulnerable.
Right.
I just need you to do.
Yeah, that messy, vulnerable stuff. That's right.
Yeah. So where's the gym where we can train that on a regular basis so that we don't lose the muscle power?
You asking me
Or do we need a gym, or how do we
we
train? How
do,
do you?
we do it. We
What's
need,
the
you know,
sustainable
that's
model?
the respectful confrontation and the fierce ability work. Because so the respectful confrontation work is more about how to confront yourself and those in your life, you know, whether it's a work situation or, you know, family situation. Um, the fierce ability is the next level, where it's how do you, as an individual on this planet, how do you confront the world system? How do you how do you play your part in recognizing that the patterns we're in right now are not, we can't sustain it. The level of polarization, the level of animosity and opposition, we can't sustain it. And that each one of us have a responsibility to cultivate new skills and strategies that are upgraded to be able to hold higher levels of, same thing, of resistance and animosity. And that the number one thing, to be able to engage with people that are different or hold different views, we have to. One of the fundamental things that I've been saying for decades in all of my lectures and workshops is, if only hanging out with people who already agree with us were going to solve our world problems, we would have already solved our world problems. Meaning that we spent so much time reaffirming each other, the same viewpoints for each other, but that's not solving anything. And that comes back to, Miriam, the disconnect of that. Why is it, even though we know better, we have arguments and fights? I've spent decades working in spiritual centers, Dharma centers, nonprofits that are working for conflict resolution and all of that. And that when the groups are doing the work of the meditation or the work itself, they're in alignment. But as soon as they end that process and they go back to just who's going to do the mailings and who's going to clean the toilets and who's going to, it's frightening how nasty people can be to each other and not even aware of it.
Yeah.
So I think the first step is to, in that, is to recognize that there is a disconnect, and that, and we are seeing this happening, particularly in the U.S. This idea of unconscious harm, that's, you know, and trauma informed work, that, you know, you don't know who you're dealing with or what their story is, so please be more careful, compassionate, and mindful in that. But I think that that's where's the, so it and that both respectful confrontation and fierce ability are a series of skills and strategies. To very quickly, I've developed practices, somatic practices, to very quickly go through the process, quicker, I shouldn't say quickly, if you practice it, to rewire the system so that you can feel more skillful and courageous in the difficult conversations. And, you know, I'm doing trainings, I do trainings around the world, and I want to do more facilitator trainings. This idea of, I really cultivated that with programs I did in the Middle East and conflict zones, and of helping people hold higher level. That's a course I taught at Georgetown University, actually, in the School of Government, Department of Conflict Resolution, a course called Body-Based Skill Building for Navigating Stress and Confrontation.
Mm-hmm.
For these young people who are going to be going to conflict zones, understanding chronic stress and trauma, how do they take care of themselves, but also understanding that if they are going to facilitate negotiations in areas that are filled with trauma, that they can't expect to see results with people in a state of trauma. That they first have to address and understand the roots of that trauma, and not necessarily heal them, but find a way to get them regulated and open so that they can consider a negotiation.
And does this relate back to a state where they feel safe, basically?
Everything traces back to, at least that's it, to safety and trust, everything.
So basically, before any conversation, conflict resolution can happen, first need to, which cognitively makes sense.
Yeah. So the work of respectful confrontation and fierce ability is understanding it's not necessarily about the what, it's about the how.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of people with great ideas, and in a confrontation with, they're justified in having this conversation, getting the message across. People in social justice world and who want to see a better world, their data and their information is really valid. But just constantly pushing that data over and over again and not seeing results seems like a bad strategy at a certain point. So the question isn't the what, it's how are you approaching it? And how can you get someone that you can have a difficult conversation with still be receptive and malleable to open to new ideas? That's the fun of the work. That's the martial arts aspect. It's fun. It's not manipulating people, at least if your intentions aren't to manipulate, it's not manipulating. But there is an aspect of how can I influence the other person to the point where they, even though they don't like what they're hearing and they're going to get activated, that they can still hear it.
And what's the trick if you can change? Because of course I assume there are different levels, and it's not something that you can explain or break down in 3 minutes. But I think a micro version of that is the mini confrontation at the workplace, is the one at the meeting who starts complaining again and finger pointing.
Yeah.
So how can everyone in the audience learn to create this mini bubble of safety in that moment so that the other person will be able to let the guards down for just a moment?
Well, I think it's about what's the relationship, and have you built safety and trust up into that point? I would say, I think it's a great point you're making. The idea of respectful confrontation, if we can get people to realize, oh, it's not so bad, it's actually necessary. Because I believe, the more inclusive a work environment you want to create, the more you must have a system of holding each other accountable, right?
Yeah.
You know that. You must, because if you go back to a hierarchical system, which isn't inclusive, there's a built-in accountability system. It's there, and people rest in that, in a sense.
And if it's inclusive, it by definition means diverse. And if it's diverse, it's confrontation is built in because we all believe that we are right.
Right.
We're so different from each other.
Yeah. So the idea is, imagine, and this is what the work of the Weston network is creating cultures of mutual empowerment, which is based on this. You can create an inclusive environment where everyone feels that their voice is heard, there's buy-in, where everyone feels that what they're doing, they're contributing, that has value. They feel safe, they feel trusting, and they must commit to, when there's a rupture in the relationship or someone is doing something that's dysfunctional, that they hold them accountable. And the whole idea, Miriam, with that is that if you do it as it's arrived, not in the moment, because if you're activated, that's not a good moment to do it. But if you do it soon, then the level of reactivity is going to be lower, because it's just basically maintaining. Hey, I just want to let you know, even that. Hey, Miriam, let's say you and I have a really strong work relationship, and where we really respect each other and we really are creative with each other. And I can say, hey, Miriam, I just want to let you know, I've just been noticing the last 3 meetings that when I share something, you cut me off. Then you're just probably going to go, oh man, I didn't even notice that. Sorry. And you'll adjust, and it's done. It's done, right? It's maintaining it. It's when you don't do it, it builds, and sometimes it gets to HR before the person hears for the first time that there's something going on. So that's that level of creating safety and trust, and is to deal with it as it's arising, clear it, and move on.
Can perfectly see it, and also how it exaggerates if we don't address it, because then there's also the part, why didn't you tell me? And then I'm thinking of this situation where there's just this annoying person in the meeting or in the team, and this person always speaks too long and everyone gets annoyed. Would it then mean to debrief afterwards and to say, hey, I've noticed this is happening, this is how it makes me feel, or this is what I observe how the group reacts, and this is what I need, what do you need? Would this then be the appropriate way to address this person who annoys everyone? Because it's nice to be inclusive, but if someone is annoying,
it depends. It depends on, I need more details, right? It depends on the level of safety and trust in the group. That first of all, I'm not sure if you're asking, should I confront them in front of the group?
afterwards.
Which could, but you could. Again, if you're not approaching it from, hey, I'm accusing you of something, if you're just basically doing it, this is a behavior I'm noticing, right? And this is the effect it's having, and most people would just be like, oh yeah, you're right, okay, yeah, that's I'll adjust it. So what's interesting to find out is, again, if you do the practices of first, how would you approach the confrontation before you do it, you may find that actually it's a confrontation to yourself, that if no one else is bothered by it and you are, then it's more about you than them, right? So that's one. But if everybody knows it, and if it's something that's happening and no one is speaking it, the person I would confront is the supervisor, the team lead. Right? And my confrontation is, what I'm noticing is that you don't let us go ramble on and on, but for some reason you're letting them do it. The effect it has on me is it causes a lack of trust, of you're not being consistent. And what I need is consistency. If you're gonna expect something from me, I expect you expect it from them as well. So, and to prompt them to have the conversation. So I don't know enough, you have to know all the circumstances in that.
Beautiful. Thank you for the nuances.
Yeah.
It shows how complex all these human interactions are.
Yeah, and to go back to the reason why we don't do it is because there's still a part of us that loves to, this could be a whole other conversation, is that if someone harms us, our first instinct is to want to harm them back. So we can use all the loving right words, all the appropriate words that you read in books about how to approach someone, but in the end, really the way you're saying it and is, you just want them to suffer. You want to harm them back.
And that's where the self-regulation comes in. So before addressing it, first checking in with myself, is it about me or about them?
Yeah. And getting into your heart. The work is about open-heartedness, right? That there's the power and wisdom of the heart, the transformational power of the heart.
Yeah.
And if I can give four a process of like a 4-point key process of this. This is just an overgeneralization of how to approach this. Is number one, make sure you're regulated. When you're regulated, you're more in your heart, you're more able to have compassion and to come from common sense and wisdom, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's so you're regulated. Number two is meet the person where they are. You may not want, it may be exhausting because it may take a lot more time, but to meet them where they are. From there, create safety and trust, and then speak your truth.
Yeah.
That's the 4 key points for a successful, difficult conversation. Stay regulated, meet them where they are, create safety and trust, speak your truth. And that is the formula for keeping them engaged
Mm-hmm.
and getting more buy-in, getting them more malleable and receptive to maybe come out with a win-win solution.
Yeah. Very valuable. And then I would say, just to finish, one thought of the earlier example, as you said, most people would react once you confront them respectfully. They would say, oh yeah, sure, haven't even noticed. And then I would think that if they don't react like that, but take it personally or shoot back, this is basically the proof that there is a lack of psychological safety. So a bigger problem to be addressed.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's again, I in the right context, I can say that's the fun of the practice in fact, most people come to the respectful confrontation training waiting for the part, but what do you do? How would you confront someone like my mother or my boss, right? It couldn't possibly work with my mother, right? So, and that's a fun segment. And I call it, yeah, but what if? Where people, in fact, I could do a stand-up show about that people call, yeah, but what if? And so just very quickly, it won't, it's very abstract and very general, but the respectful confrontation method is broken up into 4 parts, and each part has its theory and practices and ways for you to cultivate. And if you cultivate all 4 parts, then you can be effective in even the most challenging conversations and situations, relationships. And again, it's based on a martial arts kind of idea. The first is cultivating respectful self. It's working on yourself, presence and who you are, your own sense of power, your own sense of regulation, your own value system. The second is respectful engagement. How do you truly engage with someone? What is true engagement? So that you're cultivating impact and influence and understanding on a detailed level how to meet someone where they are, not just an abstract idea, hey man, we're all one, right? But to really meet someone where they are. The third is respectful offense, which means that's the speaking your truth. That's the actually getting activated. And the fourth part, and very important, is respectful defense. It's not about being defensive, but it's learning skills to understand what aggression is, to actually learning what could possibly come your way, to have a system of being quickly to evaluate, is this high-grade aggression, low-grade aggression, and having strategies to step in to mitigate that, to de-escalate it, and again, all based on safety and trust, on safety.
Yeah. What an important part, yeah, to be aware of the boundaries, and there are situations where it might not work, but then at least we have the responsibility to be safe ourselves.
Yeah.
To keep safe. Huh. Thank you. And with all this body of work that you've done and all these years of experience working in extreme situations, what remains your number one challenge? Or what's your number one challenge at the moment?
Let's say, one would be that I give too much. that I can trust that I don't have to give as much. I'm finally learning that after all these years. That's one challenge. I would like to challenges I would like to stretch into the same level of capacity that I have with groups, as you know, to have larger groups. You know, right now, I would like to be, you know, to be able to have the same impact with larger groups. That feels like would be a delicious stretch for me. I think that's it. So that's it.
And when you say giving too much, is it giving too much content or to give too much of you in terms of
myself? To be able to regulate to be able to monitor my own level of energy, how much input and output of my own energy.
I think that's something that, many facilitators can relate to. Maybe in the nature of why we chose that job for in the first place.
Yeah. But I would say that for me, facilitation it's an alchemical process. It's a process of it's a process of transforming, that it's taking an element and transforming it to its highest capacity. To me, what facilitation is, and the joy that gives me is to know that's where hope and possibility and healing and reconciliation can happen for our planet. Because I really believe that some of the solutions that are going to help us evolve may not exist yet, and they're waiting to be born. And they'll be born in these moments of true messiness. They has to, at least that's my viewpoint. And that's the exciting thing, that to facilitate the space for alchemy to happen, for the new to emerge. That's in a sense waiting to emerge.
Yes, and for me, it sounds as if it's the time of facilitation.
Yeah.
Without messiness, nothing big can emerge.
No.
And to help something that hasn't been there before to emerge, we do need facilitation and those who can stand in the fire.
Yes. And that's the work, to train ourselves to be able to hold that higher level of tension and resistance. And messy doesn't mean harmful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Having listened to the past hour, I think that's one of the messages. Do you train kids?
I have trained kids, not a lot, and I have facilitators that do. And I think that this work I know that this work would translate really well with young people. Yeah.
I was just thinking that, because in order to really achieve your vision, then wouldn't it be helpful to start earlier, before all of these defense mechanisms and trauma and harm have started to emerge?
Yes. Yeah.
Beautiful. Before I ask the one question that I usually always ask and haven't asked yet, but that would feel a little bit disruptive, I first want to ask you the question if there's anything that you would have wished to talk about, but that we haven't touched upon yet.
I don't think so. I've really enjoyed this. I don't get, the level of detail and depth that we're talking. So I think it sums it up. I'm trying to think, is there anything else? I mean, in terms of just logistics and just like basic logistical things, no, I think of course, there's a million other things I would love to have conversation with you about, of course. But I think for this purpose and this, this feels really good. Is there
Yeah.
anything you would have liked to have asked or would like to have discussed?
Similar days, I could open a million other
Yeah.
Pandora's boxes. Um, hmm.
What
What do
I
you?
think what I would say is that I want to emphasize that more is that what I'm talking about requires really a time of practice, of deep practice. Um, and people may already have backgrounds in somatic work and martial arts and various things like that, but to not underestimate the power of bringing in the body and the heart, um, and that it's not about intellectually using the heart and the body. It's really using the body, and it's really understanding um, the power of compassion. And compassion is not an intellectual thing. Compassion is really a heart-centered frequency.
Which starts with self-compassion.
Yes.
Need to feel ourselves to be able to feel others.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think this requires courage
Mm-hmm.
to go there.
Yeah.
And especially for leaders. Are you hopeful about leadership, about the leaders we have at the moment? Because it sounds, when I listen to the characteristics or the attributes that you relate to leadership, which is vulnerability as part of power, which is about embodied compassion, respectful confrontation, all of this deep work. When I look around the leaders we have, they're so busy
Mm-hmm.
doing. Is there any hope?
Um, yes, I think there's hope. I always distinguish because I get that asked a lot. Because in Fierce Civility, I have a process called the 6 steps to lasting peace. The pathway, 6-step pathway to lasting peace. And so people last a 6-step pathway of hope actually is what it is. So people ask me, what is, do I have hope? I say, I may not be very optimistic, but I have hope. I think things are going to get, another thing that I've been saying often for decades in my trainings and workshops is that the bad news is that the systems as we know them are crumbling. The good news is that the systems as we know them are crumbling. And we're in that in-between place, that liminal space. And what we're seeing, I think a big reason for why we're seeing so much opposition and polarity and pain and inequality and all of that is where the level of anxiety of the unknown.
Mm.
We're letting go of the old, but we don't know what the new is, and we're just hovering in this in between. And those of us who can see that it's our time, it's really our time to step up. If
Mm.
we are facilitators of transformation and of hope and of peace or whatever you might be as a facilitator, please, the planet needs us now to step up. And I call it being midwives for a system that's dying, for the dying, and midwives for what's being born. And I have hope because what we are seeing is that the leaders of the, I call them 20th century leaders, or on a better day, I might call them dinosaurs. The ones who still have a lot of power, they know that their time is limited, and then they're in a fight, flight, freeze response, and they're doing everything to hold on, even if it means taking down the whole system. And there are a number of leaders who are doing it differently. And there are a number of young people who are getting that, I'm not going to work with a boss who is a dinosaur or is 20th century leadership style. So I do have hope. I mean, I don't know if it's going to happen in a week or two, but but I do have hope.
Yeah, so it needs the masses, the new generation, to really oppose against that and say, okay, I'm not willing to work in such a system for such a dinosaur. And do you think that these people you just consider dinosaurs, just to use the language, are they resistant then to the system or the steps of the respectful confrontation? Or what would it take to enroll them?
I mean, I'm talking about world leaders, right? Government leaders and things like that. So um, one of the most important things in respectful confrontation is to be able to have the wisdom to say that it actually doesn't serve to have the respectful confrontation, that to be able to discern and to say they're not going to be malleable, they're not going to change. So it's just going to be it's going to be a waste of my time and energy. It might even cause more harm. And I think that that's also important in terms of how we're engaging in the world, with fierce civility. One of the important things is to be able to I believe that the key to having hope and getting us out of what we're currently in with the polarization and opposition is to find new alliances in surprising places.
Mm.
We have to reach out and connect with people that are different. But to use discernment to be able to say, well, that person, their viewpoints are so extreme. There's no point. It's just not logical. It's just not practical. Because just because you say, I'm not going to talk to that person, if you turn around, you'll see there's at least 10 to 100 to 1,000 to 1 billion other people that you can approach who would be more open and malleable. So I would say, that to be discerning in that. There are always, but I have found, I don't know, Miriam, I've always found, regardless of where I've been, even in helping men in the Middle East shift their viewpoints of women and girls, even with CEOs, even with top scientists and engineers, that in the embodied experience, that they may not totally drop in and say all is one and we're all, being all groovy and hippie and everything, but that there is a softening of the heart. Mm. And that there is, and I've actually had someone say who with all due respect, who was totally resistant in a 2-day workshop, that by the second day they were able to at least say, I can see the power of this in everybody else here. So therefore, that gives me an idea that this is powerful work.
That's a compliment.
Yeah.
It's a crack.
Exactly.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Did you ask the question yet, or that you were going to?
No, I will ask it now. I just needed to first to have this kind of warm, nice closing. And then, oh, by the way, I still have a question to ask. It's all about not breaking the flow. What makes a workshop fail?
Arrogance. Relying on the manual. And not being able to have respect for every person in that room. And not opening up to your own vulnerability.
Thank you. I put all the links in the show notes. It's the end of my podcast jingle.